Gary DePaul with Unlabeled Leadership. Welcome to episode 103. Annemarie Shrouder guides others in a black and white world. Here's a shout out to listeners in Illinois, specifically in Plainville, River Forest, Rochester, Streamwood, and Cary. With that, let's get started. In a loving way, Annemarie refers to herself as a can opener. She's Canadian and BIPOC. If you don't know what that means, it stands for Black Indigenous People of Color. Being BIPOC contributes towards her understanding of diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is her field of expertise. Annemarie facilitates workshops, speaks at companies, consults, and helps them with things such as their diversity strategies or their LGBTQ engagement strategies. She's the author of Being Brown in a Black and White World and has her own signature methodology called the ABCs of Inclusion. Is Annemarie good at what she does? Well, I'll let one testimonial speak for itself. The person writes, and this is about her facilitation, that she was able to guide and lead a conversation to bring everyone into the discussion. The group itself was extremely diverse, and at times, it could have broken down into a problematic conflict. Annemarie was able to lead discussions away from problems, but without preventing people from participating and without cutting off discussion. A good facilitator improves a meeting or session. A great facilitator draws so much value from everyone in the room that you end up getting far more in far less time than you ever thought possible. Annemarie is a great facilitator. Part 1. The world needs your brilliance. I've been involved in education professionally for more than 20 years. One of the things I learned is that you need to internalize what you're being taught. In other words, you need to make it your own. The first story that Annemarie shares has something to do with this. Here's Annemarie with her story.
Several years ago, 5 to be exact, I believe, I was working with a leadership coach by the name of Lisa Marie Platske. She runs a company called Upside Thinking. She said to me one day in a coaching call, if you're following a trail, it's not your path.
Okay.
And that stopped me in my tracks. No pun intended. It was a new thought for me. What she was trying to get across to me was that I had to carve my own way. I had to do things my way. Working with her, her tagline is, the world needs you and your brilliance. This was just another conversation in a series of conversations over a couple of years as a coaching client of hers that allowed me to see who I am in the world, what I have to offer, and to begin to really stand in that. This particular quote, if you're following a trail, it's not your path, really gave me pause. And I actually had a visual image of bushwhacking,
Yeah.
And if it's easy, then obviously somebody's been there before. Then I'm not doing my thing. I'm doing somebody else's thing or trying to do somebody else's thing. Lit a fire underneath me. And I remember it every once in a while when I feel like I'm maybe getting a little shy, But the point of all of our work in the world, the point of my work in the world is to do me. And it's going to look different than everybody else's. And I have something specific to offer because of who I am, my experiences, how I walk through the world. If I don't do that, then I'm not doing what I need to be doing in service.
Which is a little bit different than seeing how someone is doing something, learning from that, but internalizing it in a way that makes it real and true to what you're doing and allows you to adapt to what you've learned from the other person.
Yeah, I do see it as different. And I'll give you an example that's mine.
Oh, great.
I'm biracial. If you and your viewers could see me, you'd see that I have brown skin, but my mom is white and my dad is black. And so I do diversity work. Over the years, since hearing that comment from Lisa Marie Platske, I've been able to really sink into what does it mean to be biracial and what does it mean to be biracial doing this work with organizations. I've been able to sink into a space of both and rather than the polarization of either or. And I think who I am informs how I do this work with clients. And I've been able to solidify that more and more over the years because of that quote.
I love it. That's beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been really freeing for me, actually.
What I'm hearing is different from what I was hearing before, that part of who you are, what you represent, your beliefs, your styles. Let me take it back even more foundational. Your values are what drive what you do and guide you. It's like your moral compass. It guides you through situations. And what I'm hearing you saying is that when you start doing what someone else is doing, now, and I may be reading totally into this, and it goes against or rubs against your values in a way that isn't congruent with those values, then you really need to stop and think about this path that you're going down. Am I getting it close?
Yeah, I think there's different ways that we could interpret this for sure. I see it less about values and just more about standing in who you are as a person. What's important to you? How do you show up in the world? And really owning that and not being afraid to say, hey, this is me. This is how I'm doing it. There's lots of coaches, there's lots of consultants, there's lots of people that do diversity and inclusion work now, but we all do it in our own way with our own flavor, if you will. And if I'm trying to be somebody else because I want to be as successful as they are, imitation is the most sincere form of flattery, sure. But if I'm not being me, then I'm not stepping into what I could be offering to my clients or as a leader or regardless of what the role is. We need to be authentic.
I get it.
Yeah, we need to be authentic.
I love it.
Exciting.
Part 2, we often think we know best. Of the 7 leadership principles I talk about on the show, one of the most common ones is connect with others. To connect with other people, sometimes you need to listen to them. You have to give other people the opportunity to contribute and express their thoughts and ideas. It's simple, but not always easy to do. Unfortunately, there's a tendency to take over conversations or want to contribute more or listen less. Liz Wiseman, the author of Multipliers, might say that some people take up all the air in the room, or maybe all the oxygen in the room, but they leave very little for other people. The story you're about to hear is not really about taking up too much air in the room, so to speak. It's about what it means to listen effectively. Again, here's Annemarie.
7 years ago, there was a project happening in Ontario. I live in Canada, in Ontario. It was called One Vision, One Voice, and they were going around to different communities in Ontario, communities of color, to talk about the disproportionality of Black children in the child welfare system. I attended one of these town halls for interest. I wanted to see what was going on. I wanted to hear what people were saying. The process was that they put us in small groups at tables, and everybody around the table was meant to share their experiences with the child welfare system as people of color. And this particular town hall was also for the LGBTQ2SI+ community. And they had very specific questions, and somebody was to take notes. At the table that I joined, I was the one with the least amount of experience or involvement with child welfare. I hadn't tried to adopt a child. I wasn't a foster parent. I hadn't been in the system. So I decided that I would do the recording of the notes. We went around the group. There was about 6 of us at the table. The woman next to me, who was not a person of color, said that she was an executive director of a children's aid, and she was just there to listen. And my eyebrows went up. And I thought, my internal voice was like, sure you are. And this is my favorite story to tell because she did just that. She sat at the table, she took notes, she listened, she asked a few questions for clarification. The only time she spoke was when somebody asked a question of her directly around the child welfare system that she was able to answer. And I was so impressed by that because what it said to me was that even though she had a certain degree of social power in that room as the executive director of an organization, she was coming into that space to listen and learn. As a woman who was not of color, she didn't have anything to offer in that space in terms of experience for the specific conversation that we were having. And she recognized that, and she was humble enough to say it out loud and then do it. It was fantastic. That led to us having a conversation after. It led to us working together. And I have watched her since in 2 organizations really show up for her staff in terms of knowing who she is, knowing the limitations of who she is in terms of her perspective, being as transparent and honest as she can with them when she doesn't know, circling back and creating spaces for people to share their perspective that she may not have because of who she is in the world.
That is pretty impressive.
Isn't it?
It is. And Let me explain this. It was from Southwest Airlines. I learned from them that everyone can lead. Doesn't matter what role you're in.
Mhm.
If you're in a conversation with a group of people, one person may put out an idea, and that person is, in a sense, quote unquote, leading at that moment. They're putting out an idea. The role of everyone at the table is to inquire and to learn from it, not to change the subject or judge or anything like that. Is to pull from that idea and make sure that they understand. Then it goes back and forth. Someone else may lead and then everyone else inquires. When I've talked about this in speaking engagements, I describe it this way as leading versus inquiring. It's sort of like this experience with this person. She, as an executive, she was in a sense modeling leadership by listening, by trying to learn and inquiring. It's sort of like a different perspective from the way I've described leading versus inquiring. It obviously had a great effect because you ended up partnering, collaborating with that person afterward.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think, to me, inquiry, I love the word. It's a beautiful word. It's part of leadership. How can we lead if we don't inquire what people need,
Yeah.
where people are at, what experience they're having? And yet, often we don't inquire because we think we know, or we think we know what's best.
We make assumptions.
And we make assumptions, absolutely. Based on our point of view, based on our experience, we just barrel ahead thinking that that's going to work for everybody on our team or everybody in our community, whatever the case may be, with often tragic consequences.
The other part of inquiry is just learning.
Yes.
If you're going to lead, it's like those concepts and behaviors are integrated. If you're not inquiring, you're not learning. If you don't do those two things, how can you lead? Which is, I think, your point.
Absolutely. And there's always going to be something we don't know, can't know, won't know because of who we are and who we're not, the many identities we carry, the many experiences we have. So if we can remember that, that reminds us to ask, to lean in and ask some questions, ask some better questions, ask more questions.
Part 3, as long as you have a brain, you have biases. There's a saying, everyone has a story. And I would add to that everyone has something to teach us. With learning, it doesn't have to be intentional. It could be just observing what someone does, or putting it another way, learning vicariously. Annemarie offers some advice on how we can improve our leadership. Here's Annemarie.
Well, my advice for folks is first to be clear about who they are. And what I mean by that is, who are you in the world, your identities? How do you see the world? Many of us don't spend a lot of time thinking about that. But if you're from a marginalized group, if you're a person of color, if you're a woman, if you have a disability, if you're part of the LGBTQ community, etc., then likely that's on your radar a little bit more. Knowing who we are as leaders is important because we're going to lean in and lean away from people based on what we think we have in common with them, identities, experiences. So that's important. I think we need to really be clear about who we are and the impact of that in terms of our lens. And then we need to recognize the possibilities of bias and blind spots based on who we are. The point there is to recognize that there are going to be things we aren't aware of, things that we don't know, things that we're going to miss. And then we can use that awareness then when we put those glasses on. I like to call it a lens. When we use that awareness, when we have that lens on our leadership, we can use that lens to ask better questions, ask more questions, come to situations with a humbleness because we know there's going to be things that we're going to miss, create spaces to listen and to learn together and encourage dialogue. And the last thing is to create opportunities for people to connect. Because when we create those opportunities for people to connect and we build community, that's where we can learn about each other, learn about ourselves, hear different perspectives, and then use those in service.
If we're not connecting with people, we stand the risk of having those biases and blind spots affect how we interpret and perceive those people. To really get over all that, you have to start out. I like this progression where you really need to get to know who you are, which leads you to your blind spots, which leads you to cultural biases.
Mm-hmm.
Then gets you to a place where you can start to connect and learn.
Yeah. And even when we're connecting, we have to always be aware. I call it the little voice, the voice inside that's nattering on at us all the time. That's where bias and judgment and assumptions live. We have to learn to catch that voice. I don't think it's ever going to go away. I'm not one of those people that thinks that bias can disappear. But if we pay attention to our internal monologue, we can catch it while it's talking to us. And then we have a little bit more control over how we respond or how we react, because we'll see our assumptions rather than just acting on those assumptions.
I'm going to date myself. 30 years ago, we called that internal tapes.
Oh, yeah.
That play in our head,
Yeah.
like cassette tapes.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, or 8-track tapes if you really, oh boy.
Careful now.
Yeah, but the thing is you're so right, is that your second point about learning about biases, your blind spots, your behavioral tendencies, when you become aware as much as possible, there is an instance where you can stop yourself from falling into one of those tapes or one of those traps or one of those little voices. And what makes us persons versus just human beings is that we have that short little opportunity to remove or not have that trigger change our behaviors or guide our behaviors in a way that we don't want.
Absolutely. If we're aware and if we practice paying attention.
Practice is it.
Practice is very important. And we're going to make mistakes, and that's okay. That's, another piece of the humbleness, right? When we make a mistake, we come at that situation with a willingness to hear the impact and do better.
You just said something that is really important, and it's the willingness to make mistakes. There is such a fear with a lot of people that when they're talking with someone who's different from them, they're afraid that they're going to say the wrong thing. And I've heard so many people say, well, that's okay. You're going to say the wrong thing at some point. Just accept it, recognize it. And even if a person is offended because of what you said, learn from it and move on, grow, move on.
Absolutely. I hear that all the time in this work. I don't know what to say. I'm afraid to say something wrong. I'm afraid to offend somebody. And it's a real fear. And it comes from a place of, wanting to build connection and not wanting to alienate someone or hurt someone. But the fact is that there's no way we can know everything and all the rules and all the ways that people are going to interpret and be impacted by what we say or do. And so I think a big part of leadership is that humbleness and being willing to hear, get feedback from people about our behaviors or our words and how they were impacted, listening to that, taking that in, acknowledging that we've made a mistake and that there has been impact, and then, committing to doing better. I think that's just part of being human. And as leaders, we model that for the people that we lead.
My thanks to Annemarie Shrouder. If you'd like to learn more about Annemarie, go to the show notes. And if you have a question or a comment, go to unlabelleadership.com. Find the message icon and leave a voicemail message for up to 1 minute. I like to thank those who contribute to the show. Your contributions make a difference because this is an all-volunteer service. Also, I'd like to thank you for listening. This is Gary DePaul. Until next time, lead on.